All right, folks, welcome back from the commercial break. And as promised, a very special guest, the one, the only, Newt Gingrich, the former House Speaker, the great political mind, historian, author, television star. You can pick any title you want to use for him. He's achieved them all. Newt, welcome to the show.
Glad to be with you, and congratulations. You've
Thank
had a
you.
terrific run developing this program.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, we're really been blessed. We're really great and keep getting good guests like you. So that's what moves the show along. It's great. So I want to talk about where we are in this election, hanging election. And you have written some pieces and talked recently and really caught my ear on something that this isn't just about deciding who won the Trump v. Biden election. It's also about the future of American elections. And what if you can just extrapolate some of the concerns that you've been able to identify as you watch all these irregularities be squeezed into the public light, one by one. They're hard to get a hold of, but as we see them, what do you see wrong with the American election system?
Well, I think in many ways we're beginning to resemble both the level of corporate and political corruption that defined the late 19th century, early 20th century. Some of the behavior, for example, the Nevada state legislature and governor have adopted laws which are really like Tammany Hall.
Right.
They guarantee you're not going to win. They're totally un-American. And if you only stay inside the state, it's an internally closed system. So you can't bring, the courts are going to say, well, the legislature wrote it, the governor signed it, what are you complaining about?
Right.
The fact is, it is fully as corrupt as anything Tammany Hall ever tried to do. We also have, and it's an emphasized corporate corruption as much as political corruption, because you look at the way in which Twitter, for example, or Facebook have been censoring people.
Right.
That's a form of corruption. You look at the left-wing networks and the left-wing newspapers who are enthusiastically lying every day. That's a form of corruption. So in my mind, you go down this list and you end up with a series of really very unacceptable behaviors which threaten the freedom of individual Americans. I mean, and you see that really beginning to work. You go to some of these states where left-wing Democrats have decided that casinos are vital, but churches and synagogues aren't.
Yeah.
And you're really beginning to see use of political power to coerce everyday people into things they don't believe in, they don't want, but using the power of the government. I mean, sheriffs in upstate New York have now said publicly they will not enforce Cuomo's insane rules for Thanksgiving. And he's incensed because he wants to use the government to punish people.
Yeah.
Recently, as you may know, he recently literally welded shut the gate to a Jewish cemetery because he didn't want them to have a large memorial gathering. Now, I mean, if that's not a direct violation of religious liberty,
Right.
and a direct violation of the right to assemble. So we've watched the Constitution being thrown out by these guys who are crooks, who are dishonest, and who will run over us if they can.
It's the debate between the big government Democrats and small government conservatives has gone on for a long time, but the acceleration, but particularly in the last 2 years, of the exercise of power in these Democratic states, what do you think emboldened these politicians? There's always been, certainly if you go back to the Bill Clinton era, there was always a counterbalance. There was always some in the Democratic Party that would put some weight on the backside of this, and of course the American people are a tremendous check and balance too. But what gave rise to a sudden group of Democratic leaders who felt they could seize this much power in this short of a time?
I think a couple of things. I think first, they've been getting more radical. That you were to go back to Herbert Marcuse and Berkeley in 1961. There's just been a steady movement to being more violent, more coercive, more radical. I think second, it's one of those. I can't remember the exact right phrase, but if you're a left-wing governor or a left-wing mayor like De Blasio, COVID became the excuse to be who you really are. and it's like the mask was dropped.
Yeah.
And whether it's Whitmer in Michigan or Cuomo in New York or Murphy in New Jersey, um, these people are really bad people, and they enjoy power. They lie routinely. They like coercion. They like the sense that I'm the boss and you're not.
Right. Yeah.
And it's a remarkable breakdown of what has been a relatively restrained American system, where we've had a number of limits that enabled you to, in a sense, hide behind the law. That the law protected you. And now
Right.
what you have is the law is hunting you, and the law wants to destroy you. It's a remarkable turnaround.
It's almost hard to imagine those words uttered when we, from the era that we all came from and grew up in. But you see it every day. And I wonder, the episode this past weekend where Governor Gavin Newsom, who's been one of the biggest, imposers of COVID restrictions, even though his state, even during all those restrictions, the state has continued to go up. So he really hasn't suppressed the virus, but he ends up going to a dinner and violating his own rules, and he doesn't tell the truth about it. How do episodes like that, is there a political boomerang to some of these things? You had Whitmer, I think, or her husband go to the cabin once. You've had Nancy Pelosi at the hairdresser. I think the Chicago mayor, Lightfoot, was at the hairdresser. When a group of these strong, imposing Democratic leaders are then caught violating their own rules, does it start to build a political movement against them, you think?
Yeah, I think what you're seeing, and you saw it in the election below the presidency.
Right.
For example, I think every left-wing referendum except marijuana, every other referendum failed, all across the whole country.
Yep.
They failed in California as much as they failed anywhere else. I think the Republican gains in the House were in part a reflection of that. I think the survival of people like Susan Collins, when she was being outspent by enormous numbers.
Yeah, crazy
Or
amounts of
I
numbers.
talked today to Lindsey Graham, who had the most expensive Senate race in the country,
Right.
and went home and boom, turned it around within a matter of a week. I think that what you don't have yet, because one of the great weaknesses, and one of the things, in an ironic way, one of the things that Trump was doing was he actually gave a lot of thought to communicating the concepts that he was governing by.
Mm-hmm.
And if you
Right.
read the best of his speeches, they're remarkable.
Yeah.
Much closer to Reagan than to, say, either of the Bushes.
Right.
But the Republican Party as a whole undervalues the importance of words, and it undervalues the importance of winning the argument. So we'll have to wait and see. What I'm impressed by, and at Gingrich 360, we now have a series of young podcast hosts who are brilliant, including
Yes.
one young guy who's, I think, 18 or 19.
Yeah, I think I might have been on that show last week. It was great.
Yeah, but part of what we're doing is we're cultivating a new generation of thinkers and talkers. And I think they're all going to be anti-government. I think that they're all going to be saying, first of all, government tends to be controlled by bureaucracies. You look at this teachers union, for example, it's clear the teachers union has no interest in students and no interest in education. It's essentially just a power machine designed to get money out of its members. So I think there's going to be an anti-bureaucracy part of this.
Right.
But I also think there's going to be a much deeper understanding of what Lord Acton meant when he said that power tends to corrupt and absolute power corrupts absolutely. When you watch somebody like a Cuomo or Gavin Newsom,
Right.
you're watching people who are corrupted by power. Now, de Blasio doesn't quite fit that because de Blasio is crazy. And clearly the worst mayor in the country.
Not sure he'd even object. Yeah. Yeah. I said, I'm not sure he'd even object to that description.
But generally speaking, I think what you're seeing is that the best of the Republican governors are very cautious and actually believe their job is to be a steward of the public interest and to maximize the freedom of individuals and families. The Democratic governors tend to believe that it's their job to protect the government against you, and to insist that they raise your taxes to pay off their government.
Yeah, that's a profound statement when you think it through, and so antithetical to the American experience. It is remarkable. As you look out at the election, as we're coming into the period where electors are going to have to be named soon, how do you handicap the president's chances, and what do you think of his legal strategy, and what is the bigger takeaway that the American public should take from this fight? Is this just Donald Trump trying to hold on to power, or do you see a bigger cause here that the president is fighting for?
Well, I've said publicly and to him that I hope he will not concede
Right.
until we have recounted every vote. That I think he owes it to the American people to insist on an honest count. And if he concedes, we will never get an honest count. So in that sense, I absolutely hope that he will hang tough no matter what the pressure is. Second, I think that he has a long shot but real opportunity. Graham Allison, who was the Secretary of Defense for Bill Clinton,
Right.
Came back and said that he thought, I'm sorry, Allison was Secretary of Defense for Obama, that he thought that there was a 20% chance that Trump would win. That because of the nature of our legal system and the nature of the way the Electoral College works, that it's a long way from being over.
Wow.
People understand that. So I think we have to wait and see how some of these recounts occur. I think we have to see whether or not there's a federal standard of action in Nevada.
Right.
But when you have, for example, as Ronna McDaniel, the Republican National Committee chair, who used to be the Michigan chair,
Yeah.
said yesterday that 72% of the precincts in Detroit could not reconcile their votes. So they would say, we sent out 100
Unbelievable.
absentee ballots, and we got 200 back. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
They couldn't reconcile. 73 out of every 4.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
It strikes me that in the states that are really marginal, Nevada, Wyoming, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Georgia, all 5 of those states, I think, with an honest count, could end up being for Trump.
That's an extraordinary thought, given how far we've listened to the media for 2 weeks telling us it's over. But I was struck last night when these two, actually watching the last 24 hours, these two Wayne County Board of Canvasser Republicans who tried to stand up and say, listen, we just don't want to certify these until these books are resolved. We should have books that balance if we're going to have an honest election. And then they were called racist, and they had personal security threats lodged against them, much like the Trump lawyers did when they got doxxed. And then they bend for a little bit, and then they come back and take a deep breath and realize, you know what, we got to stand our ground. We can't allow these election results to be certified. What do you think is the story in Detroit? Is it an old machine that didn't care to keep the books right and figured out how to get votes where they needed them when they wanted them? Machine politics have been around in these big cities, but to see it exposed this way for the first time is really unusual.
No, I know. No, Ronna told me that they had 80% of the precincts had discrepancies in 2018.
Wow.
So what you have both in Detroit and in Philadelphia is a pure machine.
Yeah.
It's not anything new or different.
Right.
These are corrupt systems. The reason we're paying attention to them is the presidency.
Right.
Otherwise, but the machine hasn't changed. And maybe there is an argument that the machine had to steal more because Trump was stronger than they expected him to be. And there, in fact, is an argument that the reason you see a sudden stop of vote counting about 1 a.m. on election night is they've suddenly realized that unless they change what they're doing, they'll lose because there were so many more Trump votes than they were prepared for. And so
You
they
really
need a
believe
3 or
that? I've
4
heard you
hour-
talk about that. I mean, you're pretty convinced that that's really what happened at 1 a.m, right? The boarding goes up in these windows.
Well, look, I'm a historian,
Right.
and so I know there can be many different explanations.
Right.
But if you follow the rule that the simplest answer is usually the right one, it strikes me, and you see this, by the way, in various hour by hour analyses of votes.
Right.
But there's this stunning moment when all of a sudden Biden comes roaring up with an amazing number of new votes.
Yeah.
Now, it could all just be amazingly random, that in 5 states it all happened at the same time. But it
Yeah.
strikes me as unlikely.
And in each of those states, there were similar behaviors, right? The GOP observers get kicked out. There's a sudden delay. It's almost as though there was a singular playbook playing through these states. And again, it could be coincidence. It could be something related to COVID and absentee ballots. But there was a very homogenous type experience in each of these states. And I'm curious, when you were the speaker, you empowered your chairman in the Congress to do real oversight. I mean, you had some really great, chairmen who knew how to dig, people like Dan Burt and others, and they got to the bottom of issues like this. In Michigan, where there's a Republican legislature, Pennsylvania Republican legislature, what should these lawmakers be doing to assist the Americans to understanding what happened here? Should they be dropping subpoenas?
Well, they should be done with subpoena. What they should really be doing is saying, we are going to insist on a complete 100% recount. Actually, what's called a canvass.
Canvas, right?
We're going to
Yeah.
look at every single vote. We're going to make sure that we actually understand what happened. And we are not going to elect any electors until this happens.
Yeah.
Because the state legislature, Justice Kavanaugh wrote a note, it's in a footnote in a decision in Wisconsin,
Right.
where he said flatly, this is up to the legislature.
Yeah.
And I would say to anybody who wants to get an honest count, call your state legislator and tell them you're expecting them to do their job. And in the 4 states that the Republicans have a majority, they should be doing it. In
Yep.
the 5th state, Nevada, you're going to have to, I think, have a U.S. attorney file a
Right.
federal lawsuit, which
Yep.
I think would be modeled on the way we took apart segregationist law in the past.
Really?
Sure, it's the same principle, that the federal government has a right and a responsibility to intervene if the civil rights of citizens
Are being at stake, right?
violated. And it's clear that the civil rights of Republicans are being totally run over in Nevada.
Yeah, and that's really the question here, right? And when you look at the most prescient argument that the president's team is making, it's really about equal protection, that you can't have voters voting one way in half of a state and voting an entirely different way in another state. We did a survey here, it just came out this morning, of all of the Pennsylvania county clerks, and half of them followed the Secretary of State's very questionable legal opinion saying you should cure ballots if they come in, fix them yourself. The other half said we thought it was illegal and we didn't do it. So you literally have 2 groups of voters in Pennsylvania treated very differently. That's sort of the core constitutional issue that the Trump campaign has a lot of meat to, doesn't it?
And frankly, they should also go after Zuckerberg's
money.
$400 million foundation on
Yeah,
the same grounds, because he's coming into Georgia again.
that's right.
And he
Yeah,
give
we
the
had that
money
yesterday.
only to Democratic counties.
Yeah,
And that's clearly false, certainly for a nonprofit foundation. I mean, it'd be one thing if he was a super PAC, but as a nonprofit foundation, they clearly should not be doing this.
yeah,
And but that's just an example of what I mean by the whole corruption of the system.
yeah.
I mean, you now have these billionaires who think that they get to make the rules. And I'm told, I've not seen the details yet, but I'm told that Soros will be in Georgia spending a lot of money.
I saw a report to that
It's
effect.
going to
Yes.
be, the next 6 weeks are going to be really amazing.
Yeah, no, they really are. Do you feel that the Republican machine, the machine you need to get your vote out in Georgia, and you know Georgia better than anyone, do you think the machine's ready to counter whatever Stacey Abrams and the Democrats are going to put up there? I mean, they have a very activist organization down there now.
Republicans have to learn that there are 2 parallel events. There's a campaign, which is what we like. You
Right.
raise lots of money, put up lots of TV ads, makes you feel good. And there's the election, which we don't like. Okay? The Democrats have exactly the opposite model. They didn't care if Biden stayed in his basement, because
Right.
their goal was to use the election to get him elected, no matter what the campaign was. And so we have a grave danger in Georgia. I mean, the Democrats have 2 pretty weak candidates once you explain who they are.
Right.
And one clearly among the most radical people, maybe the most radical person ever
Yeah,
nominated.
people are starting to
by
get a sense of Garnock's record now for the first time. You're seeing, yeah.
But I can imagine a circumstance where we do really well in the polls, except that Stacey Abrams generates 300,000 votes or 400,000 votes.
Wow.
And so I do not believe the Georgia Republican Party is in any way prepared for the depth of this. And I think the Georgia Republican voters are demoralized and confused.
Right.
They have a governor who's not delivering. They have a secretary of state who's not delivering. They thought they were going to carry the state handily. They're watching it be stolen. Nobody's effective. And I think there's a very real danger we could lose both seats.
Wow, that's that would be a big headline, especially with so much at stake. You know, the Republicans, it's their Senate to lose right now, so that would be a remarkable thing. When you look out now, whether Trump is president on January 21st or retired as the 45th president of America, there is now a different tent that Republicans live in. It's bigger, it's more diverse, it is more tilted to the worker, less tilted from the country club Republican. When the party wakes up on the 21st, no matter which way, how do we tend to that flock? How does the Republican Party grow that? And if you're the Democrats, how are you going to try to pick away at it, right? There's two ways to look at this. What do the Democrats do to take this incredible new coalition that Trump built? And then what do the Republicans have to do to keep it and growing into an electoral majority for years to come?
Well, I think Kevin McCarthy, the Republican leader in the House, probably has the best grip on this. With Elise Stefanik's active help, young
Right.
Congresswoman.
Yeah, she did some great work for the GOP.
They went out. They have the most females, the most minority,
Right.
The most diverse House Republican Party in history, and I think they intend to grow that and continue down that road, which is exactly right. At the same time, I just wrote a newsletter at Gingrich 360 pointing out that when Clinton won, 2 years later, I became Speaker and we picked up 54 seats.
Right.
When Obama won, excuse me, 2 years later, led by John Boehner, we picked up 63 seats. And so I raised the question, if you're a House Democrat, how many seats do you think you'll lose in 2 years? Because it's going to be close enough now that I think the mathematical odds are probably 9-1 that McCarthy's the next Speaker of the House.
Wow.
Which has a double effect, because as it sinks in, his ability to recruit candidates, his ability to raise money goes up.
Yep.
And Pelosi's goes down. And so, you know, if she's seen as a lame duck, because they're not going to be able to hold the House. If Biden does in the end become president, they will not be able to hold the House in 2 years.
Wow. Yeah, no, that's a big dynamic, and it's right around the corner. It doesn't feel like it, but it's going to be around the corner before we know it. I'd love to just examine one more dynamic with you, because you and I have talked about this before, but you can see it playing out every day, even in the shadows of the hanging election. The left side of the party is not going to be satisfied where Joe Biden ends up, even though he moved, significantly to the left compared to where he was in his career. They're not going to be satisfied. What is the dynamic you see inside the party, and then what is the opportunity that conservatives can seize upon as the party tries to tug itself further and further left?
Well, I think when you look at the Biden administration's transition team has appointed to the Treasury team somebody who believes in reparations for African Americans, which is totally undoable.
Right.
When you look at the deputy chief of staff, worked for Beto O'Rourke, and believes in compulsory gun purchases where you have to sell your gun to the government, which is totally undoable. There also will be, and this is something that people need to keep a track on, this will be potentially the most corrupt administration since Warren G. Harding. You look at the number of corporate lobbyists who are piling back in.
It's amazing, and no one's talking about it. It's amazing.
Well, in the Senate report yesterday,
Yep.
that Hunter Biden was involved in Russia and China, and that Joe Biden knew it.
Yeah.
And I just
Irrefutable evidence.
If you have a party whose ultimate method of winning the presidency is to steal, why wouldn't you think once they were in power they'd keep stealing? And so I think that'll become one of the big stories of the next 4 years.
Yeah, I think the ethics issue is going to be gigantic. And we just had a poll today. It's coming out in a little bit. A large majority of Americans believe a special prosecutor should be named to look at the Hunter Biden, Joe Biden business dealings of 2012 to 2017. Do you think that happens? Is that a good move? Is that something Trump and Barr should do before they leave office?
I'm not a big fan of.
I know you're not. Yeah.
I mean, look what it did. I'm also not a big fan. This is just me. I don't think playing gotcha politics in the long run is healthy for the country. I think what the Democrats did to President Trump was disgusting and destructive, weakened America. I think we can beat Biden on big issues and big themes. I think the corruption, the news media, the morning they no longer have Donald Trump to hate, will start chewing on the Bidens.
You think
Because
so, huh? Yeah,
look,
that'll be a change.
my whole career was built around, and I got fairly far with it,
Yep.
was built around the idea that the news media is like a great white shark. If there's blood in the water, it eats.
Yep.
It may even have to eat its friend. It may even cry while it's eating, but it will eat.
That's
Because
pretty
it's
good.
the nature of the beast.
Yep.
And so I think if the Bidens think that they're going to somehow be taken care of, they're in for a huge shock. It'll take about a month after they no longer have Trump to kick around.
Wow.
And after about a month, they'll go, oh, we have Biden to kick around.
Yeah.
Which they will only do, of course, because of their deep commitment to truth.
Of course, which we saw for 4 years.
And their hope that Kamala Harris can replace him.
Yeah. Yeah, there
Which
seems to
will
be
be
a
the
lot
other
of
part.
cheerleading on that already. You see it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the other part of the equation.